Welcome, everyone, to the INC Transportation Committee meeting for January 9th, 2025. We're starting off the year with four big topics plus an announcement, so we're glad you're here. Uh, as you can see on the screen, we've got first an announcement about a sign-on letter opportunity on neighborhood greenways. Then we'll hear from Amy Ford, the Executive Director of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure in Denver, talking about the work plan for 2025. We'll hear from Matt Fromer on Governor Polis's new vision for transportation by the year 2035 in Colorado. We'll get to know Yessica Holguin, who's the Transportation Commissioner for District 1, which is the central region, kind of the Denver metro region for CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation. And we'll end with Nicholas Williams from DOTI giving an update on Denver Deserve Sidewalks that's gone live in 2025. They're going to start collecting funds and doing repairs and doing the planning for the big work to come. We're going to start with Alan Cowgill, who has some information about a sign-on letter opportunity. Alan?
Thanks, Joel. I will be very brief. Joel asked me to join you all. He had heard about this sign-on letter opportunity, so I will fly through this deck as quickly as possible here, as there are some much better speakers tonight than me. But essentially, what we are asking for is to Denver to implement a neighborhood greenway concept. So what is a neighborhood greenway? It's a low stress, low volume, low speed street that's comfortable for people to bike, walk, or roll on. Very popular in cities like Vancouver, Portland, Seattle, San Luis Obispo, and it has benefits. Residents can still park in front of their homes, get deliveries. It just essentially has these diverters here, what we'll talk about in a minute. What are we asking for on neighborhood greenways? Denver's neighborhood bikeways have been incredibly appreciated. I use them all the time for walking and biking. But there's been a consensus among a lot of folks in the community that they don't go quite far enough in their design to get more people on bikes, to make them more welcome spaces for people to walk, bike, and roll. 57% of Denverites would bike more if there were some more comfortable routes. This is some great data that DOTI has come up with. But a CU Denver study that was done in the last few years shows that only 19% of users on neighborhood bikeways, our current version of this, feel very comfortable on those streets. So there's some room for improvement. So what we're hoping to have diverters to be added to them. What is a diverter? So you can see a couple examples here. They can be like the one on the left, very low cost treatment that essentially just means that drivers cannot go through the street. You can turn left, or you can turn right, or you can go straight through the intersection, but you can't continue along the street. And that makes it so that there's going to be a lot less traffic. It's going to be a much quieter street, a much more welcoming street. You can see the example on the right here. I believe it's from Portland or Seattle, where you're actually putting planters in there and people can put vegetation and things like that. So a little bit more expensive, but and you can see that drivers can again turn and access the homes in front of their streets, but it does limit traffic. On a recent survey, 80% of respondents showed that they prefer this model, the diverter, over a traffic circle to make the street more comfortable. And the other nice thing about greenways is they add to a really nice sense of place for community. Cities like Vancouver's have even put in a little amenities on them, like benches and add additional street lighting and things like that to make it more comfortable for people to kind of gather in them as community spaces. So it's not just kind of a transportation; it's essentially creating a little park, a mini park, if you will, that's a street. How are we communicating this to DOTI and the mayor? We have drafted a letter to the mayor and DOTI Executive Director Ford. It's already signed by the Denver Streets Partnership, Bike Streets, Vamos, Denver Bicycle Lobby, YIMBY Denver, Greater Denver Transit, CoPerg, and I think DOTI Advisory Board is looking at it next week. Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Council is also considering signing it as well. So if you would like to sign it as an organization, as your RNO, you can do so at the link here. I will put that link in the chat, and I will also put a link here to the letter as well. And thank you so much. And I'll put my email here in the chat as well in case anyone's had any questions. I'm happy to take those over email or chat. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks very much. Okay, now we'll turn to Executive Director Ford. We're fortunate to have Executive Director Ford with us here. We like to start the year whenever possible, hearing from our transportation department in Denver about what's coming, what's the work plan prior to the end of the year, It's always, budgets are pending approval, but now it's been approved. Now the work plan exists, and we're going to start the year knowing what's coming and what to get involved in. Director Ford.
Thanks, Joel. I really appreciate it. And Alan, I appreciated being able to hear that on the Greenways side. And, when we talk about our streets, we really talk about sort of two levels when we think about the Denver Moves Everyone framing. One of those big swings and one of those big discussions was about greenways and how we think about that. And I almost call them mobility parks in a sense, and how we think about that in connectivity layers to our parks and others. And frankly, some conversations that we've been having recently with Mayor around greenways and our core network and what that means and looks like. And so I look forward to getting the letter. I actually think this makes for a really interesting conversation. And thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. And this presentation, if you will, I'm gonna sort of fly through it, not linger too much. And some of you may have seen some of the elements of this if you've watch council briefings or otherwise. But yes, we're in 2025. Let's say that thank you again for, welcoming us and the participation in the INC and sort of your engagement and feedback over the last year. So we've talked about our priorities and our goals of how we think about where we want to go, transportation especially, but then also DOTI as a whole. And today, I know we're at INC transportation, so I'm definitely going to talk transportation, but I am going to talk a little bit too about some bigger picture things that have some impact with everyone in regards to solid waste and wastewater, and because these entire things fit into this holistic system of service. And they're also bounded by how we move as we go. And I think many of you are aware of this and what we do, but just thought, by the very nature of it, I would show that slide again as we go. But when we sit and we talk about our priorities and we think about our goals and how they roll up with the mayor and how we think about this broad focus on a safe Denver, a vibrant Denver, one that's affordable and that really delivers great service and great government, I wanted to share with you some of where our priorities continue to go in 2025. And we would not be a DOT without a significant focus on safety and how we continue to reduce fatalities on Denver roads. We saw a small bright spot at the end of 2024. We are down for the first time in over 5 years in regards to fatalities at the end of 2024, only by about 5 or so, which we would love more. And very honestly, we had a number of rising deaths this year. Every category went down, but for our motorcyclists. And we had a significant rise in motorcyclists, and we're still digging into some of those reasons and what was happening. But, how we continue to reduce speeds on those high injury networks and continuation of some programs that I'll talk about here in the future is part of what we want to be in our master plan and how we think about our work plan for 25. But how we continue to really focus on delivery, and that is in the vibrant side of this, how we continue to not just deliver on our spends, if you will, and how we do our maintenance and our ongoing maintenance of our roads, and whether it's our potholing or our paving, or how we continue to maintain and manage our bridge infrastructure or others, how we use those dollars and effectively put them in, but how we also think about completing projects. And in fact, working with the team and asking, you'll see some projects listed here a little bit later on, but projects that we start in 2025, and I have goals and priorities of starting at least 25 projects in this coming year in 25, opening at least 12. And when I say that, there are going to be many more projects attached to this, but we talk about critical signature projects, and then how we continue to spend our dollars in regards to our maintenance and otherwise. But it's also a focus on our delivery services and our mobility and how we continue to think about how we move people, whether they're biking, walking, rolling, how we think about whether they're riding transit. As you know, we just launched our connector services in the West Side, just here a couple of weeks ago, right before the end of the year. And we look to continue to build that into next year and into this year as 2025 goes. And then continuing how we think about our solid waste services. And so, when we talk about all this, and I just want to highlight, because the reason I'm tying it to budget is because we focus on what we have money for. And I know that sounds very crass, but that is one way that we're able to measure ourselves, our productivity, where we're focused our attention, and it also drives that the goals that we're trying to achieve in metrics. So you have in front of you, for instance, here our Vision Zero goals and our data. It is not yet updated with the 24, but what you will see is a number that says 77. There's a number of people who lost their lives on Denver roads this last year in 24, lower than last year, but still, we've got a long ways to go. And so you see a continued focus for us on our speed program, where we're addressing our high capacity corridors such as Federal and Alameda. We've implemented much of the improvements that we wanted to make in those corridors, and we're going to continue to march forward and measure those, and then start looking at where we expand that speed program as we go, as well as receiving a grant that we got from the federal government on how we extend Safe Speeds for All in our downtown area, and what that means and how we put all those pieces together. And when we talk about things like greenways and neighborhood streets, that's a big focus of how we look at it. There are dollars attached to safe routes to schools. There are dollars attached to our districts and essentially what I'm going to call our neighborhood streets, our neighborhood traffic systems, and how we think about bikeways and how we improve in pedestrian safety, how we slow traffic down. It's not a ton of money, and you see a $2 million number there, but that will be the core focus of those efforts and work. And we're working with our council districts members and others on how we extend all of these programs. We also have a lot of focus on our assets. And I share this because it's never sexy to talk about assets, but it is always the most critical, really, to how we maintain this system that we have behind us, whether it is our pavement, whether it is our bridge conditions. And you can see some varying challenges in our assets, in that challenges with funding and how we continue to make sure that those assets remain at the levels that we are hoping them to remain. And we are seeing some issues where we are seeing an increase, for instance, in some of our poor bridge infrastructure. You see some closures and some of that. You're seeing us working to continue to maintain the highest priority infrastructure, and where we go with our averages on how we maintain things like our condition. So consequently, you see dollars then that go into our budget, which is a part of our work plan on how we focus on our capital maintenance. So when we talk about spend, you'll see me talk about that maintenance dollars. And this is some of what it's going to be going to. And so I just thought I would share some of that with you. It's going to be going on how we rehab 19th Street. There's some focus that we have on Coors Field. We continue to do our curb and gutter and our ramp program. And Nick will obviously talk later about our sidewalk programs, but how we look at paving, how we look at signal retiming. And what we will be doing, we actually have a map that we will be uploading again, which will show every single project that is going to be moving forward in 2025. It will be available on our website so you can see and track along with us where those work plans go. And then other programs that we continue to get funded are things like fleet and otherwise, which have a big impact on how we deliver some of our services. You know, I think most of us want to talk about what we invest in that's new and how do we really shift into the words that we've been talking about with DME, the Denver Moves Everyone, and how we do things like address mode shift. And as we focus on our climate goals and how we transition people to thinking differently about driving alone in our corridors, how we encourage that kind of behavior, but also make the investments in infrastructure, like you noted, Alan, in your Greenways conversation, about the impact that people have when the infrastructure is available to walk safely, a people-oriented street, to ride safely, they use it. And we know we have some of that data from previous work and previous elements that we've done on projects. And I'll just use a small example. Some of the investments that we recently made in our community transportation network as it relates to our programs, when we look at the investments that we made, for instance, in the Montbello area, we made some small investments. We saw a 26% increase in our bicycle and our scooter trips in that neighborhood after we added infrastructure to allow for people to walk and bike and roll. When we look at the impact that we have, when we think about the neighborhood bikeways that we put in, and neighborhood bikeways with speed cushions, do we see an increase in people bicycling or scootering? Because a lot of people will say, oh gosh, I don't see anyone using these corridors. We actually have data and others that show that we've seen a 92% increase in people biking and scooting along these neighborhood bikeways as we've made these investments. So it does matter, it does impact, and it's a continued focus for us as we go along. So you can see where we're looking at some of those investments, how we think about funding for certain projects. And again, back to that $2 million that we had before, that's what will drive some of these. And we also have investments that make a difference for our green infrastructure, our water systems, and others. And you can see it here. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about solid waste. And I'd really love to open this up as a conversation with you all when we talk about our priorities. But when we talk about great government, and so I'm going to put my other hats on, DOTI, for 2 seconds to talk about things. This week was the shift that we had for how we are starting to move forward with full citywide compost rollout as we look to our sustainability and our diversion goals. And we want to be able to achieve how we recycle more and compost more, decrease our GHG emissions and our methane and others by reducing the amount of trash that we have, how we improve also our customer service. You see here to the left, actually, that customer service has been something that we've been very focused on. in as much that we haven't been hitting it. And when you put out your trash and others, our goal had been this year to try to achieve the fact that 93% of the time we would pick up your trash the day that we say we were going to pick up your trash. And we did not achieve it in 24. In fact, we were at 90%, and that number was continuing to go down. And so, in fact, this week, we started making some shifts that allow us to weekly recycling, post a weekly recycling. What we were discovering is that we were circling the city twice. We were not drastically increasing the amount of diversion that we had. And we think from an efficiency perspective that we could achieve our diversion goals and others with making some changes. And I'm proud to say, actually, this week, I just got the report here a few minutes ago, that in the first 4 days of this, we have hit 100% route completion every single day, including with the snow, which is a big deal. And so these are some of the things that we talk about when we talk about work plans that are really about products on the road and in front of your houses or in your alleys and the services that we try to provide. And then lastly, and again, Nick will talk more about this and I'll just have a few more highlights. We have launched the Denver Sidewalk program as of this year. That means billing has started, and that means that you'll start seeing investment and work from us as we do a number of different things. Finalize developing our master sidewalk plan, how we start moving forward and actually putting money into the roads and literally into our sidewalks. So both on sidewalk repairs, in fact, there is an active website as people are calling in repairs and changes that they see that they need to have on their sidewalks. And then how we continue to build out sidewalks in certain areas like Globeville, Swansea area, and build those programs out. So as you see all of these investments, I think it's important for us to acknowledge and recognize again that when we talk about these MAP projects and where we focus them, you can see here an example of every single MAP project that we have. And this again is for our 6-year CIP, and as we continue to move forward, where they go through the city, how we continue to think about investments in those areas that we're underinvested in historically, how we continue to bridge and build to levels of mobility and connectivity throughout our community, create that level of access that we think is important, how people move. So just a couple more pretty things and pretty pictures. But again, when we talk about our work plan is really about this. It's about planning and building infrastructure. It's about operating and maintaining that infrastructure. It's about ensuring that we layer mobility services to allow us to meet the needs of our community to help for a vibrant community. So a couple of things that you're going to see highlighted this year. We complete 16th Street Mall, and I think everyone is excited and thrilled about that. And really come this summer, 16th Street Mall will be up and running. And if those of you have experienced 16th Street Mall to date, those sections that have already opened, it's pretty extraordinary. And also what we're seeing is a resurgence, if you will, of the community and the environment in those areas, such that, for instance, we've seen sales tax revenue go up by 30% just in the first 60, 90 days of areas that we've reopened. We've seen leasings actually go up by upwards of 30%. You're seeing the impact of what happens when you drive investment, which we also know the pain of construction can be impactful, but then how and what happens when you activate and re-engage as these projects complete. Obviously, we are now very much into the middle of construction on Colfax Bus Rapid Transit. And we are seeing good results as we are starting the process, getting going. We're actually seeing sort of the impacts of how we look at the diversions of traffic and others as people work through the construction zones, which actually not a ton of diversion yet as we think about side streets and others, 13th, 14th, but keep us honest with that as we're continuing to go through this. And you're going to continue to see investments in green infrastructure. And when we talk about Greenways and others, and we look at, for instance, like improvements to the Montbello Channel, it's not just about stormwater diversion. This is about creation of a complete space that it has objectives that not just hit to stormwater, but think about how people move, how we think about accessibility, pedestrian access, and wanted to share some of that. And so you see this that was building on what we were accomplishing last year in a number of different programs and projects, and we hope to bring more of that in. And much of this is funded, just so you know, the budget I showed you was our general fund and capital program budgets. What we also have informing a lot of the delivery that we're going to be doing this year is our bond program and our bond projects. And in fact, many of the projects you see here, like the Central Library or others, which we're also responsible for, are from bond. So a couple more things on our work plan, and I'll close it up, and I'd love to just sit and talk and answer questions as we go. You know, even less exciting things than maintaining our roadways and others is maintaining our facilities. These are some of these environments that we see, whether it is for our team who is working, whether it is our wastewater systems and programs and others, simple things from lighting to regulatory requirements. So we continue to focus on this. And these are things that you see in our work plan about how we continue to move forward. And in fact, I show you exciting numbers on budgets, but just to give you a sense a little bit about the span of work that we do when we think about this. And we look at little things like, well, these aren't little, MS4, which means the water quality in our systems and how we make sure that we comply with all that, with runoff and stuff into our roads and our systems, off our roads and into our waterways. And so these are areas, again, that we heavily focus on. And then lastly, I wanted to share again wastewater because, and what we think about when we think about green infrastructure, investment in our public space, investment in our water quality in our systems. And so you're going to see two major projects moving forward, among others, but one of which is Weir Gulch, which is over on the west side of town in the Sun Valley area and neighborhood, where you are going to see a major improvement as part of a larger program called Water. But it's really taking that area, which will help remove it also from flood risk and floodplain risks. But again, you're seeing the greening of our environment to our sustainability goals, helping to cool environments so that we're moving less away from concrete and others, creating amenities and recreational and otherwise, not only that people can recreate in, but also move. And so you see trails and paths for pedestrians, cyclists, and others. And similarly with some green infrastructure at Lowell and Evans. Just like our 39th Avenue Greenways and green infrastructure there, again, about how people move through and engage. You can see from bike lanes to green infrastructure, how these pieces all fit together. And so you can see just some of the examples of where those dollars go. And what you see here is directly the work plans of the programs and projects that we plan on moving and building here in the next year. So as I close it out with transportation, then again, our primary focus is on our Save Lives programs, our speed programs, our continuation of our connector services. The project list is smaller, but it is real. How we look at gap funding for certain projects, how we continue moving with our safe routes to schools, how we think about the investment of those $2+ million in our neighborhood streets programs, and how we work with you all as we continue to focus on our Vision Zero objectives as we move forward. Again, I talked earlier about that focus on where we want to highlight and maintain our programs, and I already shared with you, but I just thought I'd share with you when I say maintenance, it's not just paving, it's not just bridges, it includes our signs, our markings, i.e. our striping, our parking systems, our traffic signal systems, how we maintain what we have, how we add a little bit new, and where we go with some of that. And again, I've already shared with you what we're doing right now in our compost and our diversion and our rollout programs, and we're excited to continue that forward in the year because our goal really is to get to plus 95%. And boy, if we can keep the trend that we're hitting right now with our 100% route delivery, we're excited about that, but also more importantly, continuing to grow in our diversion efforts. And for those of you who have not signed up, please do sign up for Citywide Compost. Over almost 25,000 of you have signed up since we announced all of this and the change. We're ready to start going and delivering these programs here and delivering your bins coming in February. So again, citywide, please do sign up for our compost program as we start increasing our diversion. Again, Nick will talk to you about sidewalks, and so I'll let him get back into that about where we intend to go with our sidewalk repair. But I can say this. Please do online, submit where you're seeing areas that are deficient or otherwise that need repair. It helps us start to think about our prioritization of our projects as we start to move out into this year, as we also think about the larger program delivery as this overall. All right, and last that I will close it with is more pipes and more pipes. And again, maintenance is really important. And I know that most of you don't see this on a daily basis, but you see our trucks and you see us out there and you see us opening up manholes and otherwise. It is because we are cleaning over 1,300 miles of storm and sanitary systems every year and maintaining and rehabbing those pipes. You know when they break. What we want you to know is that our goal is to not have them break. And that's where we do the maintenance that you see. So I'll just close it there. I'll stop sharing, or actually I'll just keep it off and leave it there as you don't need to see all the appendix, but I'd love to answer thoughts, questions, or observations that you all might have. And thank
Great,
you,
thank
Joel,
you.
for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, we have a number of questions in the chat, but I do want to jump in with one because you mentioned bond projects, and really one thing that I think was an important move about 10 years ago, maybe slightly less than 10 years ago, when the bond projects were being selected, was a move away from automatically assuming that we're going to underspend on maintenance and then go into debt to catch up on maintenance, like road paving, with the bond, rather than the bond being investing for future things. That was an important shift. And I looked at your graph of pavement condition index going down, 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 and I said, uh-oh, we're being set up to go back into the dark days of not moving forward, just underspending on basic maintenance. Tell me that's not true.
It's a combination. So as you know, we have a very tight year budget-wise, and this year's budget was one of the slowest growing budgets since really 2008. Citywide grew by 1%. And the DOTI budget reflected that, both from a general fund perspective and our capital programs. I think it's a combination, Joel, that you have the answers on how you do use bond, sometimes do deferred maintenance, and I think that is going to be a critical focus with future bonds and otherwise. I think it's also easy to say that that doesn't sound sexy to people as they vote for a bond. And so those new shiny projects are something that also happens. But how you maintain said shiny projects when you finish them is also an important piece to this. So it's a fine balance. You see, basically for us, our capital maintenance dollars have remained flat for the last several years. And so no surprise, sort of the reverse impact or the inverse impact of that. So I'd say it's a balance. In a perfect world, yes, we have all the dollars that we need to be able to maintain the systems that we have. We do not quite have that. And it is a combination of a variety of funding sources. And bond, I think that will be a future piece where deferred maintenance is a critical portion of future bonds.
Yeah. Okay. That seems like we're going backwards.
I think it wouldn't be the perfect answer. And I'm happy to go into the chat if you want to help select some of those questions, or I could go in and just sort of talk to a lot of them as we're going along.
Picked a few here. Alejandra has a couple questions about sidewalks specifically. Alejandra?
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. Good evening. Hi. Thank you for this opportunity. So today, I usually move by walking, and I was walking on West 38th, and I couldn't help but notice that the road was, pre-treated. It was early in the morning. Snow was blowing, wind was blowing. The road for cars had been pre-treated, but the sidewalk, obviously, with the snow the other day, and as depending on the goodwill of property owners to clear their sidewalks, which are often not cleared. So there were icy parts also covered with the new snow, which made it really treacherous for someone like me who's able to walk, but even more for someone who might be older, using a mobility aid, being in a wheelchair, children and all of that. And on top of that, the trash carts were on the sidewalk right next to fast moving traffic on West 38th. So do you have any ideas on how to address this quickly and immediately, since safety is a top priority, and I imagine safety for everybody is a top priority?
Right.
Thank you.
Good questions, and there's a couple of pieces to unpack there, right? So the first is obviously related to the bins themselves and where they're placing them, and the placement of a bin on a sidewalk is unusual, but I think it's something that we need to sit and talk about. And I know that there are times also when we talk about bins being placed, for instance, in bikeways, which is another challenge and an area that we're considering. So the bins pieces of it, obviously they should be in alleys and or at the end of the alley or at a house. It's not on a sidewalk. So that would be something that we work and our team works to try to leave notices and otherwise to tell people the proper placement of those bins. In regards to, people shoveling their sidewalks and otherwise, that is obviously it's a responsibility of the property owner, as we all know. We also know that we have our Snow Angels program where we have people who can support those who cannot do that and go out and shovel. There is not an enforcement tactic where we go out necessarily and write tickets for people who are not shoveling their walks. And so it's a combination challenges. And I think what you're saying also with the trash bins, as I was looking at your note, is those bins are also being blown around, especially in a windy day like this. And so, we always ask people after they've been picked up to move them inside, to move them out of the alley, to move them out of the way, and pull them back into their homes. We are doing a lot of education on that side too, to try to educate people to help them with that, because you're right, there is an impact to that. So. And then Alejandra, I see you had a couple other questions. So let me just talk real quick. You asked a question about federal BRT not having a total bus only lane, the entire corridor, especially in one particular section. I think you're talking maybe about South Federal, where people are delayed. So we're working right now with CDOT and looking at sort of where the bus dedicated lanes are, both it is through most of the core, over 50% of the corridor does have a bus dedicated lane through a good chunk of the corridor where it is. There will be a conversion of lane of traffic. So it would be 2 lanes in each direction plus a dedicated bus lane for a vast majority through Denver. As you move south, then it starts going back into a shared environment that would be managed with traffic signal prioritization, pullouts, et cetera, as well as in north. Right now, some of the studies are looking at the efficiency of how the bus moves and the creative, the value of how the bus moves and the timeliness of on-time schedules and what they can accomplish. Seeing that from an operations perspective, they can see that. We're watching that carefully. We've asked them to consider looking at bus lane only as we continue to move south, and whether or not there's the capacity, the space in the room to be able to do that. So it's something that we're looking at right now and talking with CDOT about as we go. But Joel, I'll let you go to some of the other questions that you wanted to elevate.
Matt Former had a question on transit mode shift. Matt?
Yeah, hi, Matt.
Hi. Yeah, let me just remember what I wrote real quick. My question.
Yeah, how are you going to do it? What's our plan was basically, I think, what I saw, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was just looking at the mode shift goal, which is what I'm going to talk about in a minute after you. And just the transit mode share stuck out to me. It's 7% of total trips today. You're aiming for 17%, which is a huge jump. And I'm just wondering, aside from the bus rapid transit investments, what else is the city doing to achieve that level of transit mode share?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've actually been spending some time, Matt, and I'm excited to sit and listen to you talk about the governor's vision for mode shift as well. Three or four different modes that we've been talking about. In fact, we've been talking about this in relation to a broader thinking about climate and sustainability and what would it take to do mode shift to achieve also our GHG emissions reduction goals, of which DME sort of fits into that, right? And Denver moves everyone. For us to achieve the goal that you're seeing there from a GHG reduction perspective, and you saw the goals, it would take Denver household the ability to shift, if we could shift 1 or 2 of their trips every week, we would achieve our goals. What's that translate to about a year citywide? It'd be about 160-some thousand trips if you just did 1 a year. So that means in my week, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to convert to say, oh, I only ride my bike or I'm only ever on transit, but that I take all of the choice of my trips if I'm also still a car driver, in other words, and shift 1 a week. So how do you achieve that? I think it's a combination of things. And this is where we're sort of putting these pieces together. And it's really sort of 4 big buckets. Number 1, continued investment in the infrastructure. I was sharing with you some of the stats and the facts that we know when we make investments in infrastructure to ride, walk, and roll, not including the transit side, that people make the shift. And if we can use that to help them shift that 1 trip a week, we're on track for where we want to go. The second piece of it is how we think again about continued investment in and roadway systems that and infrastructure systems that feel very safe for people to be able to do those moves. And so obviously our focus right now on transit and others, how we continue to think about the buy-up of systems and others, when we think about perhaps the dollars that are going to be coming in from oil and gas and others, dedicate those to buy-ups on. We actually have significant routes and others that we think that we can use to sort of help move the numbers and create that consistency and reliability in the transit system that we believe will attract people to riding transit. Not just transit dependent, but those people who are choice riders. Third are also major policy changes, and we're starting to see some of those changes shift. For instance, the parking minimums and some of the others. I mean, there are some things and swings that people are talking about that we can look at as we explore some of those. So those are some of the elements. We are in the process of putting those together as we have more deliberative mode shift and shared. And then the third and the last big thing is, and this sounds dumb, but transportation demand management. And, I see Jill joined the call and we've talked about this. More than marketing, I recognize this, but it is creating the environment, the incentive, the infrastructure, and the capacity to also encourage people and to show them the art of the possible and what it would take to make those shifts. So those are some of the pieces. We could have a much longer conversation about it, but that's some of what we're starting to look at. But I want to share that number, that 1 to 2 trips a number, because that is a goal that DOTI is going to be looking at adopting, thinking about what we do in the next year and how we can achieve that. And we've been talking, obviously, with some of you about exactly that.
So such a better and more practical framing than the framing that people who are concerned about being forced to make change might have. Let's get a last question from Richard about one-way streets.
Hi, Amy. Appreciate you coming this evening. So quick question, just the numerous one-way streets. I mean, we live in a fairly dense environment and we have, 3 lanes of traffic going one way. Honestly, on 17th Street where we live, it's terrifying sometimes to either go across it on a bicycle or to go across on a pedestrian. And I've talked to numerous businesses along 17th, which I enjoy, the many restaurants and stores. But honestly, every one of them told me, man, it would be great to slow the traffic down and have more people out and about walking. And I hate 17th or 18th just because of how quickly the traffic goes. And I'm just wondering, making the city more livable, a relatively easy solution would be to, put in one-way streets that would obviously slow the traffic down, encourage people to be out of their cars and, check out the neighborhoods rather than allow vehicles just to move from A to B through the city as quickly as possible.
Yes. And, so the one-way streets are actually something that we're sitting and talking about actively too, both in the downtown area. As you know, some want us, if we eliminate some of our one-ways, start thinking about more complete street environment and how we pull some of that together. And I mean, I think it parallels the conversation that was just had earlier about the Greenways and how we think about sort of the use of other tools and strategies to slow people down in these streets to create a more comfortable environment for people to sit and walk. And, whether it is speed cushions, I see some folks commenting here in the chat about how can we remove these one-way streets, how we look at 13th, 14th, 17th, 18th. We're going to start looking very specifically at 13th and 14th, especially as we go east here soon. We're going to be starting to talk about, we do not yet have the dollars to move into the implementation, but we have started that study and completed it in the Welton area as we go. There are plans for downtown. I'm looking to the dollars actually right now on that one in particular to start thinking about that. And in the meantime, with some of these streets, how can we make small improvements here and there that would start to continue to create that comfort environment, that high comfort zone area? So I know that we've got other discussions and objectives, and so I won't keep going on, but I'd love to come back to you and we could sit and we could talk about neighborhood streets and people-oriented streets, and maybe we could have some discussions there about that exact question as we move forward.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're over just a little bit. I'll end with, because it's so central to INC and the positions INC's taken, Vision Zero, reducing the deaths on our roads. Yeah. You and the mayor had a press conference where you announced some ambitious goals. Frankly, I'm seeing some chat about this when we look at the budget numbers. The budget numbers assigned to that look pretty small. So the key question is, are we on track? Can we really do what we're trying to do?
Yeah, we're going to be working hard to do that. We were really happy to have gotten the grant because that put a lot more money into it from a downtown area. And as you know, downtown comprised around 20% of our fatalities, actually, which is an interesting stat, a little lower this year after 24. The continued investment of the bond dollars that we have, which will go to safety. We also received a grant to do what we call road safety audits, where we're doing improvements there. The strong focus on our high injury networks is going to be where we continue. As you know, for the speed program that we did, so we're almost done with all of the implementation of the speed program, but for the last signal timing on North Federal, but if you've driven Federal in Alameda, you've seen our speed response signage, you've seen our speed limits go down. You'll see our focus on the implementation of automated speed enforcement cameras, which will also be another public process. So I don't want to say we're perfectly on track. More money would always be better. But I do feel strongly those programs are about $1 million a corridor, if you will. And so we're going to be looking very carefully at how we apply those dollars to the next corridors too. And I'd love to come back to you and talk about where we're going to take that out and then monitor and study that. I know some people asked the questions about how we do the data and the data analysis, like West 29th, which we're going to be carefully looking at pre and post about do these improvements actually make a difference? Just quick couple other stats on our safety data, just for your awareness. Our pedestrian deaths did go down this year. We did not have a single bicycle car fatality this last year, which we're very happy about. We did have 2 bicycle fatalities, though, both of which were individuals who crashed themselves, unfortunately. So it was a solo bike incident. Our unhoused pedestrian fatalities went down by 60% this year. So we are seeing progress in some significant areas, but we still have a ways to go.
All right. Thank you for making that a key focus.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Hey, welcome to stay. I know you've got a thing coming up at 7. You're welcome to stay in the chat as long as you like. We will move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker, I'd like to welcome Matt Fromer. Matt, sorry for running over there. I'll make you co-host so you can share your screen. Matt is extremely well plugged in at all levels on transportation and climate issues, etc. But especially in this regard with the governor's new vision for transit in 2035. And he offered to give us an overview of what's in there and how we'll see it come through at a more regional and local level. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Joel. And thank you, everyone, for spending your Thursday night on this meeting, talking about how to better the community. It's awesome. Let me go ahead and try to share my screen.
If it would be possible to make up a few minutes, it would be great, but the time is yours.
Okay. To be honest, I have way too many slides, but I'll try to cruise through them. Most of them are images, and I just kind of cobbled together a bunch of different things. But yeah, tonight I want to talk about a couple things. One is the governor's new transportation vision for 2035, which dropped a couple months ago in mid-November, and sets mode choice targets for transit, biking, and walking. And then the second thing is a piece of legislation that was introduced yesterday at the legislature on the first day. That's kind of a follow-up to the vision, and I'll talk about that toward the end of the presentation. Before I start, my name is Matt Fromer. I work for a nonprofit called the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, or SWEEP, on transportation, land use, and climate policy. So this is the governor's 2035 vision. There's a photo of him at a light rail station press event in November. And so the goal here is to create a transportation system that improves air quality, reduces climate emissions, saves people money by improving access to affordable transportation options, fixes our roads and invests in the maintenance of the system, ensures safe travel, whether driving, biking, walking, or transit, improves access to jobs and services for all Coloradans, including those who don't drive, reduces congestion on our roads, expands opportunities for physical activity, and addresses transportation inequities for low-income residents and rural and urban communities alike. To do that, the vision basically looks at the share of total trips today that are completed by transit, biking, and walking. It's about 10%, and aims to double that number over the next decade. And part of this, the big driver here is climate change and the state's greenhouse gas roadmap 2.0, which came out or in early 2024. And the transportation chapter was pretty thin, despite the fact that transportation is the leading source of climate emissions in the state and also the most stubborn. And so we know we need additional strategies to cut pollution from transportation. In order to hit that doubling in the share of trips that are transit, biking, and walking, the vision lays out a couple goals for each of those modes. So first, an 83% increase in transit service by 2035, an 81% increase in bicycle infrastructure, a 34% increase in sidewalk mileage, and then importantly, a more efficient land use policies that guide 52% of future housing development into transit areas and 77% within existing census urban areas. And that means sort of within the urban developed area as opposed to sprawl and greenfield development on natural lands and ag lands. There were similar goals adopted by the CDOT Transportation Commission back in September. We worked with them on those, and including a goal for safety. That's a 50% reduction in road deaths, including for vulnerable road users, and a 1% reduction in vehicle miles traveled per year, so less driving. Here is a slide directly from CDOT where they show their big three themes for the next 10-year plan, which they're developing now, the 10-year project pipeline. So you'll notice safety, fix our roads, and sustainably increase transportation choice. What they don't have on here, and something that they used to have, is something called level of service, which really focused on increasing the and maximizing the flow of car traffic. So they would look at the grade for different facilities, and if it dropped too low, a C, D, E, F, that's when they would argue that the road needs to be widened so that we get traffic to flow more quickly. And that's been sucking up the vast majority of our transportation funding for decades. That's no longer one of their top three priorities, although I think we'll suspect that a lot of those road widening projects would be justified with the safety goals, but we'll be watching that pretty closely. On the climate side, here's a look at the anticipated greenhouse gas reductions sort of by policy area for transportation. So you've got the 2035 business as usual for transportation, 25.4 million metric tons a year. We expect about a 3.5 million ton reduction from electric vehicle sales, another 1.2 from more fuel efficient gas cars with higher mileage, and then about 2.1 million tons of reduction from mode shift and expanding transportation choices. So about a third of the anticipated GHG reductions from expanding transportation options. Something we all probably know on this call is that driving is incredibly expensive. Average new cars cost about $1,000 a month. Compare that to $88 for an unlimited RTD transit pass. So a tremendous savings potential from shifting to more affordable transportation options. This is even a bigger deal for low-income households, spend about a third of their income on transportation. And here's a graph from the US DOT, and it shows the share of spending on transportation of total income for households with no vehicles. You see it hovers around like 5% versus households that have at least one vehicle. And for the lowest quintile income bracket, they're spending 40% of their income on transportation. So huge equity benefits here from diversifying transportation options and not forcing everyone to own a car. In terms of total economic benefits, this is from a study that CDOT did a while back that found that reducing household driving by about 10% would deliver $25 billion in economic benefits in the next decade. The majority of that is in less spending on vehicle operating costs, improved safety, less traffic delay, but also savings from better health and less air pollution, more physical activity, and the social cost of carbon, which we're seeing play out now in Los Angeles, unfortunately. The cost of dealing with intensifying climate disasters is a lot higher than reducing emissions up front. Creating a fair and equitable transportation system for all Coloradans. It's estimated that 20 to 40% of travelers in any community cannot, do not, or should not drive for a number of different reasons. And we need to make sure that this segment of the population has options to get around, access jobs and other opportunities. I'm just going to continue cruising through here. Transit's a big piece of this, of course, and I think a lot of people look at Seattle's approach to transit. And one thing they did about 10 years ago, and they passed a series of transit funding measures dating back to the mid 90s every decade or so. It's as if we completed fast tracks and then passed another ballot measure with double the amount, and then a third one. And now Seattle's up to about $54 billion, their next tranche of investment in sound transit rail. But one goal they have is to put as many people as possible within walking distance of frequent transit service. In Seattle's case, it's very frequent transit service, so 10-minute headways for buses and trains. And you could see the progress they made. In 2015, it was 25% of residents, and that climbed to 70% of residents by 2019. And you can see the impacts on the right side here. So the rates of driving alone went down, public transportation use went up, same for walking and biking and so forth. So this is a really good goal we should be thinking about. It's just putting people near frequent transit, because that gets at the land use side where we want to focus housing and jobs in those areas. And it also gets at the transit service side where we want to increase service and frequency. And then safety, something we're really struggling with in the city and the region and statewide. And I'm glad Amy Ford touched on this one, but certainly a benefit of investing in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Okay, getting into this idea of mode choice targets, and we've kind of been talking about it already in this meeting. But here's basically what the vision, the 2035 transportation vision lays out. And 2025 is the baseline. Here are the share of total trips for each mode. And then in the red, we have the goals for 2035. And again, if you combine transit, biking, and walking, today it's about 10%. We're aiming to double that by 2035. And then in Dr. Cog, it's slightly higher. I think we're at 11.6% for transit, biking, walking today. So increasing that to about 23% over the next decade. This isn't all trips. This is just commute trips based on the latest census data. But here's a look at comparing Denver to peer cities in the West and the share of people who commute to work using transit, biking, and walking. And we really are lagging behind a lot of peer cities here. And you can see Seattle up at 25% total there, and San Francisco much higher even. But we could do a lot. We could do a lot better, obviously. And it's within the realm of possibility to double transit, bike, walk mode share if we really invested. And Seattle's definitely showed the way. Minneapolis is doing that now. They passed a big transit funding bill at the legislature last year that raised about $450 million for Metro Transit per year. A transit agency that serves about half the people that RTD does. So we know it's possible. There's great examples from around the country. Speaking of RTD, they have been, I would say, a little bit disappointing in how quickly they've brought back service since the pandemic. This is a graph that looks at service as a share of compared to 2019 levels before the pandemic. And on the y-axis, ridership, and you can see that direct correlation. The more service you have, the more ridership you have. That's the biggest driver. And RTD is second to last place. And the share of service we had in May of 2024 compared to 2019. And you can see ridership has struggled as a result. I should say there are some promising signs from RTD this month. I think they just put in place a service change where they're bringing E-line and several bus lines up to 15-minute service and better, but it's nowhere near what we need. They're still aiming for about 85% of 2019 service levels by 2026. So we need to figure out a way to grow beyond that significantly and raise more money to do so. Here's a look at Denver's frequent transit network. So this is from the Denver Moves Transit Plan. And they've got over a dozen or so bus lines planning for 5, 10, 15-minute service. That's the blue text here. And I compared that to RTD's current service levels for each of those routes. And you can see there's just a huge gap there. The headways are double, triple, quadruple sometimes what Denver is seeking and what we know we need to meet our transportation mode choice targets. This last one, the 24 bus, always gets me because it connects, DU, a population where students own fewer cars, up through Cherry Creek and the Colfax and the City Park, and the bus only comes every 60 minutes. And up until yesterday, I think it stopped running at 6:30 p.m. So it's not reliable. It doesn't. The service span isn't there to really generate ridership, and we can do a lot better. We did work with a consultant last year, an alliance that I'm a part of, to study what it would look like and what it would take to double transit service in RTD's territory. And I think the estimate to close the gap between RTD's system optimization plan, which is their plan for 2026, and Denver's frequent transit network was about $75 million. So that's the funding gap to at least for these routes to achieve these service levels. Cool. So going back to the 83% increase in transit target in the transportation vision from the governor, here's what that would look like for RTD service growth over the next decade plus. So pretty significant increase. That red dashed line there in 2026, that's basically what they have the funding to accomplish now in the system optimization plan. And the rest would require additional funding. We have some of that coming from Senate Bill 230, which passed last year at the legislature, although I think that only gets to maybe a 7 to 10% increase in service. So maybe the 63 million vehicle revenue miles. Growing beyond that, again, would require additional funding. Okay, getting into the policy space, I just want to kind of back up a little bit and talk about something we did in 2021, and that is the statewide CDOT greenhouse gas planning standard, which was really the first of its kind in the country. 4 or 5 states have copied us since then, but what it does is set greenhouse gas reduction targets for state and regional transportation plans. So for CDOT, and then all the acronyms in the column A here are the MPOs, or Metropolitan Planning Organizations, in the state. So you have Denver, Northern Front Range, Pikes Peak, which is the Colorado Springs area, and then Grand Valley and Pueblo. And these are the greenhouse gas reduction targets they need to meet by updating their transportation plans. This is what that's led to quite a bit over the last few years as CDOT and Dr. Cog in particular updated their plans. The big one was canceling a couple of urban highway expansion projects. So I-25 Central right by the Broncos Stadium and C-470. And then a lot of 7 road projects that were planned for widenings to 4 to 6 lanes, really refocusing on complete streets with bike and pedestrian infrastructure. The new bus rapid transit investments, and I think CDOT plans to invest $400 million or so into BRT in their 10-year plan. Although we still have another 5 that are completely unfunded. And then the Bustang service, that's been a big success story, increasing Bustang. The Northern Front Range shifted about $150 million toward transit service. We've got big jump in telework, although they counted a lot of greenhouse gas reductions from that. I don't know if that's really materialized because people are still traveling a lot, and vehicle miles traveled has really returned to where it was pre-pandemic despite telework rates. So I think we need to take another look at how we're accounting for that. And then a big one at number 9 there, the land use changes, which really came out of this greenhouse gas planning standard. They did the modeling and realized we've got to do something to really direct new housing and jobs into more urban areas and to promote higher density around transit. I mentioned Bustang, and this is, I think, a really big success story that other states are starting to copy, is the state DOT really providing this robust intercity bus service. This was brand new in 2015. There was only 1 trip a day on I-25, and since it's grown quite a bit, I think right now you can get a bus up and down I-25 or along I-70 at a Union Station that leaves every 45 minutes or so, which is fantastic. This was funded with like a temporary kind of 3-year pilot in 2022. That's Senate Bill 180. So we're going to have to find some funding there to maintain Bustang service and grow it. And also to market the program. People need to know the busing exists. The ridership has been really strong and definitely exceeded expectations, but I'm not sure the word is out as much as it should be. Still, even with all that, the greenhouse gas rule and busing, we're still spending the lion's share of our state transportation money on car infrastructure projects. And this is the screenshot from CDOT's 10-year plan dashboard. So you see highways, 2/3 of funding, rural pavings, another 13%. And so the transit and the highway/transit categories combined to 20%. In reality, the highway/transit category includes express lanes, which do have the busing running in them, and in some cases like the Flatiron Flyer, but for the most part, it benefits cars. The toll lane and the carpooling. So I estimate that's really about 11% the total. So yeah, I think the total share of spending from CDOT's 10-year plan on transit, biking, and walking is about 15%. That's kind of our baseline heading into this next plan update. Here are some of the big highway expansion projects. We are currently building, I-70 Floyd Hills, a monster. This Pena Boulevard, I'm sure a lot of you know about and are working on. I-270 expansion, and then segments of I-25 north, like at 84th and 104th, are still on the plan. And these are incredibly expensive projects that really soak up all the money. For just one of these projects, you could easily build like all the bus rapid transit projects in the DRCOG's long-term plan. So tremendous opportunity cost here from the highway widening projects with I think little benefit in terms of congestion and pollution in the long term. And here's just a look at one project, and this is from a decade ago, but it looks at traffic on I-25, and this is between like Denver Tech Center and South Denver. But basically congestion returned to pre-construction levels within 3 years of the project being completed, and then increased from there. So we know we can't build our way out of congestion. This is something the governor's really embraced. He doesn't, he keeps saying he doesn't want Colorado to go the way of California with their 12, 14, 16 lane highways. And then of course in Texas, they have the 26 lane freeway in Houston. So we know it doesn't work, and we need to really focus on demand side strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And here's just another calculator for induced travel. So this was the proposed I-25 widening project that ended up being canceled. But RMI built this really cool calculator that estimates the vehicle miles traveled and the climate impacts of widening highways. Okay, this is one other thing we've been working on recently. So there was a big announcement a few weeks back from the governor of Pennsylvania. And the headline was that Pennsylvania had decided to flex its federal highway dollars toward transit and given the money to SEPTA, which is Philadelphia's big transit agency, a few $100 million. And this is an opportunity that every state has, the flexing federal funds. A lot of that money is flexible, and you can move it from a highway program into the Federal Transit Administration to the FTA to pay for transit projects. Right now, Colorado's ranked 36 in flexing funds for transit, and we could do a lot better. I think we could flex up to about $350 million toward transit, and we're nowhere near that. So as we look ahead, that's one opportunity. I don't quite know if the Trump administration is going to approve these types of flex funding opportunities, but as we try to fund more transit, we should maximize the use of federal funds to do so. And then lastly, I just want to land on the Senate Bill 2530, which is the mode choice targets bill. Again, it was introduced yesterday at the legislature. The sponsors are Senator Faith Winter and Nick Heinrichsen, and then Representatives Meg Froelich and Lindsay in the House. And the basic idea is to set mode choice targets for transit, biking, walking, as well as driving alone and carpooling that align with our greenhouse gas targets for every 5 years. And the targets would be set for CDOT, which the transportation vision kind of did, and then broken down by MPO, so at the regional level, and then for large transit agencies like RTD. A couple other pieces here just to get in the policy weeds, but each of those entities and local governments would have to come up with mode choice implementation plans to demonstrate how they're going to meet those targets and start to better align our funding with the goal. So it's really setting that North Star for how much transit ridership do we want, same for biking and walking, and what do we need to do to get there. Okay, I'm sure I'm over time, so I'm going to stop there.
No, you were actually, given where we started, that was really fantastic. Let's pick up a few questions here. Richard had a couple questions on big roadways. Richard, do you want to combine your two questions?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the two things that I see, kind of the Pena Boulevard is a big thing. Of course, it looks like the preferred alternative is going to be road widening. It seems like that is the default choice. And why do we not consider congestion pricing? And honestly, if we go with road widening, it's just going to continue the sprawl out towards the airport and past the airport, and just continue what we've been doing for the last 50 years. And the other one would be the Jefferson County Parkway, trying to finish, I guess, the loop around the city. Again, the same thing. You're taking virgin land, using it for highways, and I feel like we're just encouraging sprawl for single-family homes to build out more and more and more, and car dependency is continuing to be the norm. Is there any way that can be countered?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's a tough nut to crack. Some of these projects have been on the books for a long time. That's just the way we've always been doing things, and that most other states do it, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much a federal program. That's why most U.S. cities look pretty similar. One way I've been attacking it is from the land use side. So the reason that highway expansions generate more traffic is because they enable sprawl, and developers, right, use some of their own money and some local money to build new interchanges on our highways. There's like 6 new proposed interchanges on 470 and I-70 East out by the airport, as well as a couple down by Castle Rock and Castle Pines, so they can connect some of those like low density sprawly suburbs to the highways. So huge, traffic generators. CDOT does have some policies in place to try to offset the new traffic. Like they require those new developments to incorporate transportation demand management to offset some of the new traffic with investments in transit. But also we just need to tackle sprawl head on. And I think that this administration really has an appetite for that. There was a bill that passed last year, Senate Bill 174, that directs the state to basically publish a smart growth report with a few different scenarios. And then the local governments need to incorporate smart growth into their comprehensive plans and really look at the full environmental impacts, economic impacts, the long-term fiscal impacts of sprawl on their communities. And I think that's going to start a really good conversation here about how we grow and how to really contain new growth in our urban areas.
Great, thank you. Alejandra has a question about, also, you're talking about land use and linking land use and transit.
I do. Okay. Yeah, you were talking about Seattle and, talking about their transit service and all of that. And so I wanted to ask you whether, what's the difference between Seattle's land use policies and density, mixed use density versus Denver? We always hear that RTD has, a very large geographic area to cover with the service. So obviously the bigger the area, if you also are underfunded and all of that, then you can't really provide good service. So yeah, if you can tell us a little bit about the differences between Seattle and Denver.
Yeah, good question. I think it does help them to be a coastal city. They can't sprawl like we can, and that's a major benefit. And that's no secret, or no coincidence that most of the best cities for biking and walking and transit are on the coasts. I think, yeah, just the way that transit is structured out there. So instead of having just one agency do everything like we do, so RTD does passenger rail, light rail, regional bus, local bus, paratransit, on-demand, all of it. They have a few different transit agencies, kind of a layered system. So Sound Transit is like a regional rail, passenger rail. And And that's like, those have been the big ballot measures to invest billions in that system. And they've spent like 3 or 4 times what RTD has per mile on the rail system. And it shows. Like, it's a really fast, high quality system. The stations are beautiful and it gets you around quickly and reliably. And then below that, they have King County, which is huge. It's Seattle and a bunch of other cities. And they run the bus service, a regional bus, and are very well funded. And then City of Seattle and several other cities buy up service from King County because they have their own transit goals. So you've got a lot of funding at every level of government. And that's just a different model than we have here. So it would be like if, you know, kind of like CDOT, or maybe like even, you know, regional transportation organization took passenger rail, RTD took like regional bus, and then Denver was like in charge of local bus or funding local bus service, either running their own transit or buying up service from an RTD. And that's been, you know,
what's stopping us from adopting a model that's more successful?
I hope we do at some point. We don't have the funding right now. Like, we'd have to figure out what that looks like. You know, do we go back to the ballot and run a regional sales tax district-wide for RTD and kind of spread the peanut butter like we have? Or, yeah, is it sort of county level ballot measures to run transit service, you know, in the more urban areas where transit works really well, to build out that frequent transit network that Denver is planning. So yeah, I think a lot of us are thinking about options as we look ahead and how to fund it. And yeah, hopefully we can get there.
Well, thank you very much. We heard a lot about the announcement with the governor's vision, but I don't think anybody gives a presentation on these things like you. So I hope you'll keep coming back and keeping us informed. Matt has come now a few times and is officially a friend of INC Transportation Committee. Thanks you very much, Matt.
Thanks.
We're going to move now to Commissioner Yessica Holguin, and this is a little different format. This is get to know our CDOT commissioner for this region. This isn't a presentation by CDOT on a project. This is someone who is appointed to represent this area who we have yet to get to know. So with that context, to frame the questions we bring to her, welcome very much, Yessica.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you so much for the invite. I am honored to be here. My name is Yessica Holguin. I am the Transportation Commissioner for District 1, which is the city of Denver. I probably have the cleanest territory and yet the most complex. And so talk a little bit about my background, talk a little bit about how the Transportation Commission is organized, and perhaps I can help provide additional context as to the many questions that you all are grappling with, and perhaps the reasons why we're not able to fully invest in what works in the metro area. And then I'll talk a little bit about my personal priorities. Again, thank you, Joel, for highlighting. This is me as Yessica Holguin, a citizen like you all, a volunteer who donates about 30 hours a month to serve on the state's Transportation Commission and other committees. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I grew up in the Swansea neighborhood. I grew up here in Denver, and for a very long time, I used to tell people that I grew up in Northeast Denver. Now that there's now people know where Swansea is, where Glowville is. So, and growing up there gave me a different perspective of transportation. My household was one of those households that had one car. And so stepfather worked in construction, so the rest of us took public transit everywhere. And it really shaped my understanding of our transportation system in ways that perhaps others don't. So I am also a very non-traditional commissioner. I don't come from an urban planning background. I don't have transportation policy per se. My experience coming to the Transportation Commission is from a lived experience and understanding that we need to figure out how we do a transportation system that works for all, especially those who don't have the time to be in a space where they can donate 30 hours a month to shape policy. And so I feel very honored to be there and to bring the voices of those who perhaps are not able to be there. And so in 2011, I moved to Central America, where I spent a little more than 6 years. I worked in a developing country that had the most amazing public transit. I could get from point A to point B, and I knew exactly what time the bus would leave, and it was affordable, and it was reliable, and it worked for the masses. And so I was, for once, able to see what it would be like to not rely on a car, and for many people to not have to rely on a car. And so as we think about all of the opportunities that we have here in the metro area to strengthen our systems, to make sure that we're focusing on those who are moving in ways that haven't traditionally been as part of these conversations, is a really important aspect of what I bring to the table. Let's see a little bit more about me. I'm trying to, I should say, I need to set a timer because I can talk all day. So a little bit more, one of the things that I'm really excited about is that the fact that we can have these conversations and to be able to listen from community members to figure out how we get to that level of system that actually works for everyone. And so I also want to mention that I serve on the state's, the CDOT's Transportation Commission. I also serve on one of the enterprises. I am part of the non-attainment area air pollution mitigation enterprise, which I'll talk about in a second. But those are, even though they're both part of the CDOT process, they're completely separate. And this one came from having lived 2 blocks away from what was I-70 in the Swansea area, and just being impacted by traffic in ways that unfortunately did not necessarily include a lot of the community as it all evolved. So having said that, I do want to share a couple of slides. And so if it would be possible, let's see.
Yes, your co-host, so you should see a big green button called share.
Fantastic. It looks like, all right. Are you all?
We're not seeing the presentation mode, we're seeing the notes mode.
Okay, how about now?
Did not change.
Sure. It's always fun when there's more than one option here.
Looks like it's still the notes mode. Oh, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned, one of the things that I guess has been really exciting is learning more about the entire system. Colorado is one of very diverse in terms of our transportation needs throughout the state. And so as a state, the CDOT has divided the entire state into 5 different regions. And so we are part of Region 1. And so if you can see it here alongside Adams, Arapahoe, Douglas, Jefferson, Clear Creek. And so it also includes the Eisenhower Tunnel, which is, it feels like so far for us, but it's part of the region. And I should also say that this might be a little basic for some of you, but I just wanted to make sure that this is, that we all can be, have the same information and come from the same page. So as you can see, the Region 1 is perhaps the most, there's the metro areas that are in Region 1, a little bit in Region 3, and a little bit of Region 4, but the vast majority of our state is actually in the rural areas when we think about the transportation with the highway system. And so when you see some of the numbers, it really is because of the diversity of our state. And so I'm also sharing Yessica Michaelbus is our regional transportation director for Region 1. So she's always happy to connect with others who have questions about region. It's pretty fascinating. I will say a couple of highlights about the region. It's obviously the largest one in terms of population. There's 750 employees that CDOT has just for Region 1, which are divided by maintenance and operations, program delivery, and safety, traffic and safety. And so as part of those, it's a pretty big operation. So now, to not confuse anybody, but the 5 regions are then divided into 11 transportation districts. And so within the region 1, we have, so if you can look at this area is region 1. So we have commissioner from district 2, 3, and 4, all part of the region 1 area. So it's where it becomes a little bit more complicated because my vote is 1 of 11. And so even though the regions are 5, the districts are 11. And so when you look at the needs of the state, you can see that there's a lot of diverse representation to make sure that all of the residents have everything that they need when it comes to their transportation system. So real quick about the Transportation Commission. Under state law, the powers of the Transportation Commission are basically formulating general policy with respect to the management, construction, and maintenance of public highways and other transportation systems. Advising and making recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly relative to transportation policy, and promulgating and adopting CDOT's budgets and programs. And so we do a lot of work. We're starting a lot of work, started in November for next year's budgets, and making sure that that we're balancing the need for the maintenance of our assets that Colorado has, and also the need for multimodal and ensuring that we have the success of the pilot years from busing, for example, that we can continue to build on those given the limitations of our funding. So some of the committees, we have the Small Business Diversity Committee. This committee looks at some of the federal regulations. As you all know, CDOT also manages all of the federal highways, state highways. And so it makes it a really fun funding formula and how to make sure that we're meeting all the needs with the limitations that funding has, not only from the state level, but also from the federal level. So as part of that, the Small Business and Diversity Committee is ensuring that we're continuing to focus on increasing representation of underserved or small business, disadvantaged small businesses, DBEs, women, minority business, when that makes sense. We have the committee of the audit, making sure that everything is used, our tax dollars are used in the best way possible. Mobility, which is a really exciting one. It is looking at the innovative mobility in the state and how we continue to advance to lead the way. Fiber, this is a fairly, I guess, new as of maybe 2 years ago, where there's been an interest in increasing fiber in rural areas and the role that CDOT has through their roadways, the right-of-way, in ensuring that there is access for internet service providers to be able to tap into or have a deal to be able to provide internet in other areas. The Colorado Transportation Investment Office, this one used to be called the High Performance Transportation Enterprise. The Agency Coordination Committee, making sure that the agency is coordinating in essence. We have the DRCOG Regional Transportation Committee, which is where I and 2 other colleagues participate to bring some of to create that connection between our regional, our MTO. Scenic byways, the State Infrastructure Bank, setting the rate to make sure that the loans that the department is providing to the enterprises whenever that's needed, it's in compliance. The clean transit, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and then the efficiency and accountability. So we have the Transportation Commission, and then we have the subcommittees that are part of that. So in addition to that, we also have the CDOT enterprises. As you all know, we have had to get really creative as a state as to how to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our residents with the limitations that we have. And so as a result of that, we have the statewide bridge and Tunnel Enterprise, which it used to be the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise. And the idea was to use this enterprise to focus on bridges, tunnels in poor condition. Just this last year, the legislature passed a bill that helped us create a little bit more flexibility so that we're not feeling like we're catching up when we're never able to catch up. And so this provides a little bit more flexibility now that we can use some of those funds to also address a bridge that may not be in complete disrepair, but that we can use the funds so that we can get a longer life of those bridges. The Clean and Transit Enterprise, alongside the Non-Attainment Area Air Pollution Mitigation Enterprise, were strengthened or came out of 260. And so these are really exciting because it's creating that infrastructure to truly address non-attainment areas, and especially in focusing on disproportionately impacted communities who ultimately bear the brunt of our transportation system and perhaps haven't had the resources to actually mitigate those. And then, of course, the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, or the P3 office. And one of the last ones is the Fuels Impact Enterprise. And so we have some really exciting opportunities to be creative and actually create a process to shift some of the spending so that it's addressing the needs of the community. So I will also point out that the Clean Transit Enterprise and the Non-Attainment Area Air Pollution Mitigation Enterprise currently have NOFOs out, the Notice of Funding Opportunities. And so those are due, I believe it's February 5th or February 7th for the planning grant program for the Clean Transit Enterprise. And I believe it's the 25th for the Non-Attainment Area Air Pollution Mitigation Enterprise. And so these have been collecting revenue, and there's a strategy for how this can be maximized to advance community desires. And so as we think about some of the roles that I typically ask people, if you're available on the third Wednesday of the month, join the transportation workshops. There's so much information that is shared, and I think providing that whole context is really helpful. And then, of course, the third Thursday of the month is typically our Transportation Commission meeting, but also follow the enterprises. I think there's a lot of opportunity in learning more about the roles and how your voice can be activated in some of these enterprises. For the Non-Attainment Area Air Pollution Mitigation Enterprise, we typically meet the fourth Thursday of the month, but they've set their own schedule. So I would go to the website and just save the date for the next one. Let's see, in terms of my priorities, I think there's a couple of things that are really important to me. Obviously safety, first and foremost, and I couldn't be in this space and not ask you all for your help in helping spread the word about the cell phone, the new cell phone law. It's really concerning the number of people who continue to drive even after the new year, while they're still texting, while they're still, some of them even in social media, and which points to larger issues in our society of how addicted we can be to social media, where we can't even put it down while we're driving. But this matters. Obviously, the lives are being lost because of user error. And so if we can all figure out a way to spread the word about this, it could be really helpful. Internally, also, a personal priority is elevating the voices of disproportionately impacted communities, especially communities that may not necessarily have a place where I currently sit. I would love to see more micromobility options. I personally think that we're never going to be able to create the infrastructure needed unless we look at other options. And so I'm really excited about the steps that the state has taken to increase other transportation options. And I'm really excited to continue to push for more options as well. And ultimately contribute to a fully functional multimodal transportation system that we can all be proud of. because at the end of the day, we are all contributing to this, and we know that this is a really good opportunity to create a system that works for all. So happy to share my email if anybody has any, if you want to connect, if you want to just, I can't do anything about the shoveling of sidewalks. I get that a lot. Like, that is not the state, but I can put you in the right direction. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Thank you. We have some questions. They might be about kind of specific projects. So I know the commission operates kind of at a policy level, but let's see where we go here. Just setting the expectations for the audience here. So Hong has a question about I-25 and some bridges.
Hi, I'm Hong, and I am a community member living in the Highland. I actually live a 2-minute walk away from the entrance ramp to I-25 on Spear. So I know that we are trying to update all of our infrastructure, and there's expected to be money to do so because these bridges over I-25 on Spear and West 23rd Ave are no longer up to code, up to standards. I know that also we're considering various designs for both intersections. So what are your thoughts on this project and of the alternatives proposed specifically for the West 23rd Ave road? There was this proposal of removing the ramp altogether so that it could make it safer for pedestrians and bikers and rollers to use the protected bike lane on West 23rd Ave more efficiently. Was curious about like what insights you have on that front.
So I will say that that is not a decision that the Transportation Commission takes. This is at the staff level. Having said that, I participated on a couple of the permit or the public meetings, and there is a lot of concern for. There is a lot of support for the making it the multimodal for 23rd specifically, the multimodal. I think where there's a lot of concern from residents who live around the area is the traffic impact and how that traffic would be shifted to the side streets that were not designed for that type of traffic. And so I live off of 23rd Avenue, and so selfishly I'm keeping track of that one and seeing how this is going to evolve, because it's not only going to impact me as from a transportation standpoint as CDOT, but for me as Yessica Holguin and so my family. And so it's one that I'm keeping a close track on. I do think that we have a pretty amazing opportunity, especially with Spear and creating that space for, I do think that we are smart enough to figure out how we maximize 23rd and maximize Spear to make sure that we have the traffic flow that's needed while still providing the walkability and the bikeability, rollability needed to make sure that we can create something that we can be proud of.
I wanted to respond in that in the latest stakeholder meeting that occurred, something really interesting that I learned is that they project that with the ramp removal, there is a likelihood that Jeff Park actually has less traffic than where it is right now, Jefferson Park, which I think is very interesting. Like when you touched upon, like the traffic impact, like I think that, like for that particular neighborhood, which, Northwest Denver, lots of history there, to make it more pedestrian friendly would be amazing. But I also know that they are still very much in the design phase. I was talking to my RNO's PCD chair, and we were chatting about, how Spear has the ramp and the bridge has 8 designs or something. So I'm really looking forward to what we come up with for 2025.
Yeah, and thank you for staying engaged, because that's what the power that we have to make sure that our voice is heard.
Thank you. Next question is from Benjamin, also on a specific project, but a big one you're probably aware of. Benjamin?
Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm asking, or I want to ask about the proposed federal BRT project. As you know, the current proposal does not have dedicated lanes across the entire project, and it is a CDOT project, and CDOT has, climate goals, has VMT goals, has all of those types of goals, and I'm curious how you're able to push for a project that is equitable for everyone along the corridor and who rely on federal BRT or transit along the corridor to get to where they need to go, and making sure that we don't just succumb to the status quo and not make BRT as strong as possible.
Benjamin, thank you for your question. I will say that from a Transportation Commission perspective, again, I'm one of 11, and we don't have the authority to make decisions of specific projects. Having said that, I do have the opportunity to ask questions and bring the voices and everything that you all shared back to the department and provide perhaps some recommendations. And I think that's going to be the most powerful. I would highly encourage you all to continue to stay engaged, come to the public comment time. I see Matt Frommer there a lot, and I appreciate that, because this is where we need to be, in spaces where others also need to be hearing what I'm hearing as well. It's as you know, it's still in the planning process, and I think a lot of it is being figured out. And so the more that we can bring more of the voices into the space, that's going to have an impact.
Thank you. The next one is also specific, but I think it connects to direction that the commission has set and CDOT has set that actually made some news. Post the greenhouse gas targets, CDOT announced really moving away from highway widening, which is a great thing for a state agency to say. David Mincer has a specific question along those lines.
Oh, okay. My question was about I-270, and maybe you could comment on that, but it also seems that maybe less about that specific project, but more in general. We do have these goals on greenhouse gas reduction and VMT reduction, but as Matt showed, 66% of the budget goes towards highways. Like, on a larger policy level, are you able to advocate for a shift in those investments, or is that something that we have to lobby staff and politicians, etc.?
Thank you for the question, David. I think where it gets a little bit complex, especially with 270, is that the bridges just need repair. There's no way shifting the traffic to other highways is just simply not possible, especially there's so much there's a lot of commercial vehicles. And so that's where the challenge is how do we continue to maintain what was built 50, 60 years ago? And also making sure that we're not just expanding for the sake of expanding. 270 is currently in the NEPA process, and so there's opportunity, but I would say that because the bridges are in poor condition, it's going to be an investment we'll have to have.
Can you speak to like the larger policy question of, is CDOT making the right investments and putting their budget kind of where their goals are?
So yeah, I guess to that point, as it was mentioned before, this is a very challenging year from a budgetary standpoint. It is 2 months ago, it just broke my heart when we had to cut another $63 million from the budget. And so with the resources that we have, I would say that right now the priority is to maintain what was already done, while still ensuring that we are providing the multimodal MMOF and using the enterprises to continue to advance some of those goals. I would never discourage you from continuing to talk to the department directly and the staff, because if they hear it from you all and they push it from us, I wish I could tell you that every member is the Transportation Commission is very diverse. And I couldn't make the statement that everybody has the same approach. We obviously all represent very different, very diverse areas. And that is surfaced. And so for that reason, it's really important to continue to be engaged in the process, because I couldn't, even though there is the desire from the department to continue to look at how we do other transportation, other modes of transportation, and the investment in busing and in other multimodal investments or innovative investments, that is, the Transportation Commission is very diverse.
And just to be clear, I believe 270 is not in your district, because your district within District 1 is literally the city of Denver.
Right. So the region has the 270. My district does not.
Region. See, I'm not up on my. See, I'm learning CDOT terminology. It's fantastic. Kind of a statewide question from Susan.
Yeah,
Susan,
thank you. This is a little bit out of the range, for sure, but I'm just curious, since you're a part of the big group there, what is the general reason that Colorado doesn't seem to have very many rest stops? It doesn't have places where people can pull over, and not only cars but trucks. And in terms of safety, and I travel all over the United States, and Colorado is very unique that way. And I think it's something that could help with road safety, especially with the trucks through Denver, and even travel on the Mustang and things like that. So I'm just curious if you have any information why the ones that have been open have all been boarded up, and why there are no new ones being built.
Yeah, Susan, thank you so much for this question. This is one that I'm really passionate about. Unfortunately, the answer is funding and priority. And unfortunately, CDOT has not had funding allocated. Our spending per rest stop is very, very low. Last year, we did have a disbursement, so a little bit of extra money, and that got allocated into part of it got allocated into rest stops. Having said that, there was an effort to try to get more legislative support, financial support last year. Unfortunately, that didn't go anywhere yet, but that still continues to be one of a high priority for me and for a couple of other transportation commissioners.
So I don't want to take it too long, but where would be the best place to advocate for something like that?
Yeah, the public comment time, and I can guarantee you that you will make the day of 3 or 4 commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll end where we started, getting to know you. Hong suggested this final question: what is your transportation usage? What modes do you use for what portion of your trips?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends on the day. I mostly work from home, and so my transportation is pretty much walking. But I do go to the office once a week. When it was free for RTD, it does take me an hour to get to the office on RTD. So when it's free, I take RTD. It takes me 12 minutes to drive. And so unfortunately, when I have to pay right now, it's very expensive. But I do have an electric vehicle, and I think I calculated yesterday, the 7,000 miles a year that I travel is with an electric vehicle in a 1-car household.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful getting to know you.
If I can jump in a little bit.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was curious because this word, like popped up a little bit, like the idea of like the diverse transportation commissioners, and there being 11 of them within this region. What are their transportation usage? Like, is it predominantly Like, is there a diversity of transportation usage amongst our commissioners, or it's just predominantly car centric?
A really good question to ask. I don't know that I feel qualified to answer for them, but my sense is that because so many of them are rural, majority are rural, my sense is that it's a car or vehicle.
All right. Thank you very much. And we hope to stay in touch. Thank you for representing us at the Transportation Commission.
Thank you all. Always happy to be here. Reach out if you have any questions or want to go out for a cup of coffee. Just really excited to be here.
Thank you very much. We'll end tonight, and Nick, apologies. Every thing ran over at the beginning, so everything has been pushed back at the beginning. But I think it's your boss who started it, so we will
not surprised.
We will just ask you to be concise, but really this is an update. Nicholas Williams is joining us to talk about Denver Deserves Sidewalks, and now that it's in an implementation phase, what is the update? What are we going to see this year? So over to you, Nick.
All right. And with that, I'm assuming now you can see my screen.
Looks great.
Looking good. And so I will, and I see some familiar faces and familiar names on this, and I even see some number of Sidewalk Committee members on here. So kind of on that note, I'm going to whiz through how we got to where we did. I think a lot of folks are familiar with that. So just as a quick refresher, we're talking about a citizen-initiated ordinance that passed a couple of years ago on it that amended the relationship between the city and residents and sidewalks, whereas before residents, adjacent property owners were responsible for maintaining sidewalks and even building sidewalks to an extent on there. What the citizen-initiated ordinance that passed did was really flip that now the city is responsible for that maintenance, for repairing sidewalks, for building new sidewalks on that. And in exchange for, of course, a fee on there. And really, why was this done? It was to greatly accelerate the build out of city sidewalks and to really build a quality, connected sidewalk network throughout the city. So when we talk about this, we're talking about basically three main areas. It's construction of current sidewalk gaps, places where there are no sidewalks, reconstruction of deficient sidewalks. We think the skinny Hollywood sidewalks image there on the right is a Hollywood sidewalk. And then, of course, repair of damaged sidewalks. And I think it's also important to understand the scale of what we're talking about. So total existing sidewalk in the city is about 3,100 miles. There's about 360 miles of gap, and about 1,235 of those 3,100 miles of sidewalk are deficient. We use 5 feet on there. That's just kind of a general, we think of these are our Hollywood sidewalks on there. And understanding the scale of cost, one thing I think surprised me when I came to this world and started learning about sidewalks, when we think about a mile of sidewalk, and I ask, folks, how much does that cost? That can cost, basically $1 million up on there. It's a very expensive, it seems very simple, just throw some concrete down there. But when you start to add in right-of-way acquisition, different things like that, it's very expensive. And, for a number of different reasons why we have the current condition of sidewalks we do in the city. And of course, what did the ordinance not include? It doesn't change our relationship with the federal government about ADA curb ramps and making sure that we're replacing those. We have a settlement with the Department of Justice to replace X number of those per year. This doesn't include things like crosswalks, trails, wayfinding and things. And then also, 'tis the season, it does not include snow or debris removal for sidewalks. We'll kind of cut through that. So this past couple of years ago, we put forward a committee, a stakeholder committee made up of 26 different members, 2 council members, Councilman Cashman, Councilman Flynn on there, met bi-weekly for 10 months, very dedicated group, and really tried to take what was passed by that. And as we dug into it, try to make it something maybe a little bit more implementable on there. And really kind of respond to some of the concerns we'd heard over this about fees, about a low-income rebate program, making sure that we are being consistent and easy to understand billing experience. And then, of course, making sure the whole thing complies with enterprise fund restrictions, and then also Colorado's Tabor rules that says, hey, when you collect a fee, you can't be collecting more than it costs to put out. And there needs to be a reasonable nexus or relationship of why you're collecting, and what you're then producing. And if you don't do that, the whole thing goes up in a puff of smoke, which nobody wants on that. So we'll talk about 3 changes that were made, and then I'm going to talk about implementation, but I do want to leave a lot of time for questions if it feels like I'm going real fast on there. The original ordinance based your fee, a property owner's fee, based on the amount of frontage, basically the amount of sidewalk you'd have or the amount of sidewalk you should have on there, based on a factor of what kind of road we had next. We heard concern from folks, gosh, the corner lots, it feels, disproportionately high for things like that. And so the committee said, what can we do to kind of smooth this out? And ultimately came to a conclusion of, why don't we do a base rate of $150 per year for everyone, and then apply an additional impact fee for those especially large properties. So in this case, it would be properties with over 230 linear feet would charge an impact fee of $3.50 per foot on that. And really that came from a calculation, and it was also somewhat modeled. We won't get into Tabor. It's way too late to get too deeply into Tabor right now, but making sure we are staying kind of aligned with that. If you think about the bridge fee you pay when you register a vehicle on there, you pay a base rate, and that base rate is basically whether you drive across bridges or not on there. And if you drive an especially heavy vehicle that we know has a greater impact on the network of bridges, you pay an impact fee. And so knowing that, and that stood the test of time under Tabor, we modeled this under that. And the other thing we also did was, we wanted a touch point for revenue on there. And what voters had passed, when you calculate all of it, and I'm sure not very many people went through and calculated by property, but that would have resulted in about $40 million per year. This new scheme, this fee scheme on here, really results in about the same amount. So we felt like that's appropriate. That's what voters had approved on there. So what does that base rate mean for folks? Just about 99% of single family homes are paying a $150 flat rate. And of all, including the commercial properties, all the different types of properties, just about 96%. So those especially large properties, they are paying that larger amount. For the vast majority of people, it is that $150 amount. Affordability program. I don't have to go into that. Things are expensive in Denver and getting more expensive. And the purpose of this program is not to make life more expensive unnecessarily on there. And so through the amendment process, came up with an individualized program. So based on your average median income, you'll receive, depending on levels, and I'll get into that next slide, you'll receive between a 50 to 100% rebate on that fee on there. And this is something we were able to align subsequent to the development of this. As many folks probably know, Denver moved to a pay-as-you-throw model for trash and developed a affordability program for that with these same factors. And now we're able to align those two, and basically you sign up for one, you get your discount on both. And folks really thought that's a better way to attack individual need for that and try to get to the folks that are more that really need that discount on there. A few other items. The original ordinance had talked about the fee going up based on consumer price index. We know, and we've learned very much so over the past 5 years, that often the construction cost index goes up much more quickly than the consumer price index. Consumer price index really it's less about materials. It's more about kind of operational costs. And so what we've done is kind of combine the two and do based on the amount of work that's done on the operations and maintenance side versus the construction side. That will be aligned to either the CPI or the CCI. And really all that does is that makes sure that we're not losing ground from today. If we start to lose ground from inflation, the program starts to slow, and that's not what the voters wanted. We talked about timeframes in here. The ordinance originally talked about 9 years or as soon thereafter, or 9 years. The committee felt, I think, some additional flexibility is appropriate in this. And so it changed the language to in 9 years or as soon thereafter is determined feasible by the manager of transportation and infrastructure. And right now that's Amy Ford, who you heard earlier today. And that's not an opportunity for us to take our foot off the gas and just sit back and collect fees. And really what holds us accountable for that is a sidewalk master plan. I'll talk about that briefly here in a subsequent slide. And then annual reports to City Council that really shows City Council and of course the public, hey, we are making this very deliberate progress towards this built out sidewalk network. And all of these really, again, are designed, we want to make sure this program is designed to exist in perpetuity. As long as we are using sidewalks, this program will exist. We'll build out our sidewalks, you know, that will be more front loaded, but maintenance of sidewalks, that will continue forever. That's the design here, similar to bridges. So what have we done? This is the first presentation I've given since the program is actually, we're collecting fees. And Joel, I almost thought to send either you or Jill a screenshot of we started to collect revenue. We don't really collect like a dollar bill to frame on there. We started to collect revenue. This is real now on there. But of course, with something like this, we've done a fair amount of outreach. I didn't really touch on it before. Where this is going to show up is if you get a stormwater bill, you will see a line now on your stormwater bill that shows your sidewalk fee on here. But we've developed a website and we're really trying to drive people towards this website for program information. We've got a pretty robust frequently asked questions that we're continuing to grow as we get more frequently asked questions on there. And also a link to do some reporting of damaged sidewalks. Link down below is just denvergov.org/sidewalks. Hopefully pretty easy to remember on there. And this really gets into a lot of different elements of this. Another, we kind of hit on it before. I didn't come from a construction, I don't have a construction background, more of a policy and legislation background, but I've always just been fascinated by sidewalk policy on there. And even going through that frequently asked questions, you see the complexity of sidewalks on that. The damage reporting, this is something I really want to focus on for a second here. You know, in the previous iteration of sidewalk law and liability, you could report your neighbors 311 on there, bad sidewalk. You probably wouldn't report yourself because then we would come out and say, you got to fix it on here. This has flipped it on its head to where we want folks to report sidewalks. Now, the caveat with that is, what we're going to fix is the worst of the worst right now. And we're going to talk about the master plan here in a sec. But what we want is folks filling out what you see on the right is from that sidewalks page, you get linked to this. You get linked to this form here on here. You fill out that. We really want folks to upload photos, and that allows us to go and attack those in the short term and make sure we're getting those repaired. The less critical repairs, those are being done. Those will be prioritized through a sidewalk master plan that is being developed, is being kicked off right now on here. But that is, you know, certainly folks on this call, tell your neighbors, if you're seeing very damaged sidewalks, put them in. Even if they're not, even if it's iffy, put it in. It will go into kind of the overall source of information that we're using to prioritize how we're doing that. A sidewalk fee lookup tool. This is always gets a lot of excitement here because you can see what your sidewalk fee is going to be. You can see what your neighbor's sidewalk fee is going to be if you're so interested on this. And I put two versions up here. The one on the left is a property. I am familiar with both of these. I'll leave it at that. The one on the left is a duplex on a residential street. As you see in that blue box there, it has a frontage of about 25 feet on there. So that means it's paying $150 on there. So that's what their sidewalk fee will be over $75.75 over 2 stormwater bills. The one on the right is for a condo complex on there that gets a single stormwater bill. So the person that lives in this unit, they don't receive a wastewater bill. the HOA receives that H water bill for the entire complex on there. The same thing will be for the sidewalk bill. And so this unit, this condo unit, certainly doesn't have 985 feet of frontage, but the entire condo complex does. And so that results in a bill of about $2,800. Now, when you divide that out by the number of units, that's significantly less than the 150. And so that's why you see the disclaimer under the address there. This is part of a group account. So when this person looks this up and says, holy smokes, oh no, good. It's going to be divvied up by our HOA on there. And so that's a very important tool. Like I said, 99% of single family homes are going to be paying that 150, but things like condos and different ones, they can be subject to this group account amount. Talk a little bit about, so as of January 1, billing has begun on there, and your stormwater bill comes in a kind of a rolling you get a biannual stormwater bill, 2 per year, that comes on a rolling basis. So the first bills go out, but that first tranche of bills goes out over the first 6 months. So if you haven't gotten yours yet, don't worry, you will get yours on there, but they've started to come, and then you'll get a second one in the second half of the year. I already mentioned we're doing high priority spot repairs right now as the weather permits on that. We have, and if you've enjoyed seeing me give these presentations, this is, well, probably one of the last ones I'll give, because we are hiring a sidewalk lead here. And I know an offer has been extended, and probably will be making an announcement for that within the next few weeks on there. And we have begun master plan development. And really what that master plan is how are we going to execute this in the very short term? And really, how are we going to execute this in the long term? Getting down to the granularity of here's the sidewalk gaps that we're going to prioritize. Here are the Hollywood sidewalks that we're going to prioritize. And then really collecting much more detailed data on damaged sidewalks. This will be contractor led on there, but doing things. We have kind of a, if you think of, we've contracted for a number of our street side assets, like a Google Street View type thing, but it really doesn't give us the granularity. And so for those areas, things as detailed as a kind of a data collecting cart that will go down the sidewalks and be able to collect that on there. All of that leads. We expect that to take approximately probably this year, that process on there. But then that becomes kind of our guidebook for the remainder of, for the short and then medium term of this program. That's something that gets updated about every 5 years on there, but that will be an exciting process. That is something that needs to be accepted by City Council. So that'll be a public process. This will not be a program or a plan that comes out in the dark of night on there. And I know that's something folks are very interested in. So certainly stay tuned. There will be more information on that. I blazed through that. I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. Joel, anything you think I missed?
No, I think this is super great. We'll start with the questions that are in the chat here, because people are asking them. So Alejandra has a question about if you have a too narrow sidewalk per standard, expanding towards the private property or towards the road. Alejandra?
No, go away.
I think you're still on mute.
Joel, I can dive in. I think I know the question.
You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I was muted. So I guess some of the answers were provided in the chat about, maybe being more expensive to expand onto the roadway because of the wastewater system. But what if we are able to, and it's not as expensive as, acquiring private property, expand onto the roadway, so that way we are traffic calming the roadway, and also maybe adding other elements, not just the sidewalk, but maybe bump outs. David was mentioning that as well. So taking this opportunity to maximize our dollars. Yeah.
You said it, Alejandra. I think we'll take the opportunity. We've had those discussions. We've looked at it. I think probably it sounds like the chat provided some backup. There's always complexities when you're doing that, when you're changing the cross section of right of way on there. But yeah, I think this is our opportunity to look at options like that. So I would anticipate absolutely looking at that. That's not something we have done to this point, We also haven't had a funding source and a mandate from the voters on building this. And, this aligns with, I imagine Amy talked about the speed program and really the focus on lowering speeds on streets. So yeah, it's an opportunity. It's something we've already started talking about. That's the kind of stuff that master plan will absolutely help us start to get at. Where are the opportunities for something like that?
And maybe from a one build perspective, marrying the sidewalk money, which is for sidewalks, with other money to do something bigger. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Garrett has a question about gaps.
Yeah, interested in how y'all are thinking about the gaps in the sidewalk network, how you're prioritizing which gaps will get filled, and I guess more broadly, how you're thinking the division between maintenance, repair, and filling in the network with the budget.
Yeah, and I would say for a good preview of that, if you look at Denver Moves Pedestrians and Trails, and I know the proponents of this ordinance used that and specifically articulated that in there. It is going to be I can't remember all of the factors. It is those attractors like schools, businesses, business areas, places where it is critical for folks being able to walk, healthcare, food, things like that on there, access to transit, making sure, we're really trying to build those out as much as we can. But then as far as kind of the prioritizing the overall kind of universe of all of that, the gap, the bringing up to standard and the repair, that's really what that sidewalk program, it is not presupposed at this point. I think we have a lot of good work. Of course, this is all stuff we've done before. Nothing we're not building spaceships out there. We just haven't done it at this scale. And for a city this large, this is a unique, we are on the vanguard on there, which always makes government nervous, but that's why the voters gave us this mandate and luckily also gave us a sustainable funding source to go with it. And so that kind of the really how this is going to go out, that really is hinging on that sidewalk master plan. And that's why I'm excited about it.
Hong has a question about repairs.
Yes, I have a question about your plan with the trees.
Yes. Yeah.
So trees are supremely important for, mitigating the effect of the urban heat island. And, where I live in the north side, we also, I've been walking a lot more because I did not get a chance to fix my bike's flat. So what I've noticed and what have been pointed to me by older folks as well is our sidewalks are terrible. Like it's literally like angled. And the reason why is because of mature trees, roots are sprouting up, and we love the trees. So what are the plans for ensuring that we do have sidewalks, and the way that we are able to use the sidewalks is like by walking comfortably, through shade in a hot summer day?
Yep, absolutely. And this is something back in kind of the 2016 to 2018 period, which was when I joined the city, or kind of the tail end of that was when I joined the city. We had a sidewalk repair program on there that was, instead of just waiting for folks to file complaints about sidewalks, it was a more proactive. Ultimately, it didn't work and on that. But through that process, we started to really build some good relationships or have some pretty serious conversations with Parks and Rec department, specifically the forestry department on that, and kind of set. Because it comes to a point where, we do everything we can. We've got a history of, we'll kind of jag a sidewalk around a tree on that. Because certainly the how critical trees are. And you look at kind of some of the broader initiatives of the city dealing with the urban heat island, dealing with the kind of inadequate tree canopy on theirs. Yes, those can be at conflict on there. And so I literally this week, the city has a new city forester on that. And I appreciate Director Clark set us up first to have a conversation about sidewalks on there. Because ultimately it does become a hard question of when you do everything you can and you still can't avoid the conflict, which wins, a tree or a sidewalk I'm not going to do a poll here on there, but I think, you know, and it's not as simple as that, of course, but there are situations where it comes down to we can either build a sidewalk or we can keep the tree on there. And we'll have to have those hard conversations on there, trying to maintain what the voters want, but what the voters have also and what residents have also demonstrated their priorities around trees. But we have been very creative. What was it? They called it like fingernail clipping the roots to kind of push them back without damaging the tree enough. But the horror story side of not addressing that is a city in California on there did a sidewalk initiative, and this is a number of years ago on there, and it went very poorly. It was not, I don't think, set up as well as ours. But you know, kind of what makes me laugh is almost in a vacuum, that same city also did an initiative about planting bamboo trees in the right of way, which just tore up the sidewalks. You know, not Denver on there. But it goes to show, I mean, yeah, we need to have that relationship because there's going to be conflict on there. So what I can say is we're going to be creative and understand the priority for keeping trees and really build a close relationship with the forester as we implement this program. And we won't do a bamboo initiative, I promise you that.
I do want to also tie it back to the question of like, can we widen our sidewalks into the roads? Like, I feel like that would be a somewhat of compromise where,
yeah,
you know, the trunk of the trees can be the empty space, and then we have more space on the side of it. But I know very little about trees. I just know that we need more of them.
Yeah.
So thank you for your answers and hard work.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Let's pick up a couple quick questions from Susan, a billing question and implementation question.
Yeah, I know we're going out of time, getting out of time, and I also think that the billing question could be handled maybe through a different avenue. It's just that there's so many bills come from the city, and if you get behind, you get more, right? So it's like if you don't pay, and if you have multiple properties. So I came back from like a 6-week vacation, and I had all these city and county, and I'm like, you know, just trying to deal with that. That's a personal issue for me, but I just think that the city could be a lot better on how they manage their accounting systems and how they bill, and you should be able to go online and pay and things like that as well. So
absolutely. And Susan, if I just cut in real quick to brag, you know, we have been working on developing, because at this point, DOTI we send you 3 different bills now, or we have 3 different fees. We send you a stormwater, we send you a sidewalk, and we send you a trash. We are working and through procurement and on a consolidated utility billing system and working on a citywide basis, because I agree. I mean, it doesn't make your bill any cheaper, but I think it makes it more up-to-date, modern, and easy to keep track of.
Thank you. I think so too. And some of the bills are handled by different contractors, and that's not efficient either. Okay, so the other one, I think it's been answered, but you know, where the Hollywood sidewalks exist, I don't think a lot of homeowners realize that the right-of-way actually goes into the yard quite a bit. And so you're gonna see everything from retaining walls to irrigation, trees, landscape, everything you could imagine, you know, right by that Hollywood sidewalk. So I'm just wondering if the city, I like the idea of putting it in the street. I think that's a great idea. But also if the city would reimburse for some of those major costs to have to move things like an irrigation system back into the yard.
That will be probably one of the biggest challenges. And I say that because it has been one of the biggest challenges, especially when we're doing either sidewalk gaps or, building up a Hollywood sidewalk, which is just basically a beefy curb on there. Ultimately, those, and this is where I sound very much like the bureaucrat, the heartless bureaucrat, those are unpermitted encumbrances in the right of way. Now, we're not going to go in and just go to war with homeowners who put in landscaping or retaining walls on there. We're gonna work with folks on there, but we also, I don't think voters would expect us to be replacing retaining walls, using the sidewalk fee to replace retaining walls, which then ultimately results in, of course, less sidewalk on there. And so we're going to have to strike a balance with that. We've tried to do that, you know, the Corey Merrill neighborhood. I think that was why Councilman Cashman was put on the committee, and really, you know, that is absolutely a person that is an advocate for expanding the sidewalk network. But then as we went through the Corey Merrill neighborhood, he saw just how it can sometimes be a house by house battle on that. You know, and honestly, kind of to some of the other questions, that's a lot of times the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is with these Hollywood sidewalks when there's not enough right of way to build that sidewalk. And that's where we potentially get into property acquisition. And that's where these $1 million a mile sidewalks can come, you know, $3, $4, $5 million a mile on there. And that's not because we want to pay more. That's because we have to pay more. We can't just take people's property without compensation on there. And so, yeah, hopefully my speed through this presentation didn't make it seem like this is going to be easy. It's absolutely not going to be easy. But, you know, the biggest thing is when we talk about problems, there's unfunded problems and funded problems. And I like to think of this as a funded opportunity here on there. But Susan, yeah, that is going to be tough. We've been relatively flexible on working with folks about things that are encumbering in the right of way, but we'll be doing it at a scale now. We'll really have to get that pretty solid. And that's something you have to be consistent with as you go through the entire city. You can't treat some neighborhoods differently than others.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Nicholas. I think you've done a great job of, you know, explaining everything and being flexible. One last thing we have a request in the neighborhoods is that every 4 houses, they want a basketball court installed. If we could possibly do that for the little kids.
I love it. I love it. I'm going to talk to Mr. Jokic and see if he's willing to provide some matching funds, and let's make it happen.
That. But thank you. I think you've answered my questions and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Susan.
I've got a quick question, then we'll give Jill Ocontori the pride of the final question.
Yes.
And it's about pride. So this is, it'll be very good. My question is about the FAQ. On the FAQ for repairs, for things that are significant, that need, you know, trip hazards, it explicitly calls out flagstone, you know, sandstone sidewalks, saying, we're not ready to repair that, and we will remove it and replace it with concrete in a repair context. And that's not what the ordinance says. If there's an intact piece that can be re-leveled, and I live in a neighborhood with a lot of flagstone, you know, we have neighbors who have just sort of gotten together and re-leveled them. This is not difficult. So why does the FAQ say that?
That's probably a little bit more rigid language than is appropriate. That's probably a good catch there, Joel. And flagstone, it is, if you're not familiar with it, is the sandstone sidewalks that you see in more historic neighborhoods, but oftentimes can be in horrendous shape. And really in that, I referenced the Neighborhood Sidewalk Repair Program from 2018. And that was a major, if you kind of go back, and Denverite did a number of articles about that. And we really worked with residents who wanted to do this. The ordinance also, of course, says it needs to meet ADA standards. And that can be very challenging with flagstone. And we recognize that on there. And so that's why we won't replace flagstone. But yes, like leveling. And we worked with some different neighbors. We also did at the time, worked with, I think it was the CU Boulder mechanical engineering team to analyze the strength of a sandstone flag versus a concrete flag. And we're able to actually do different standards for flagstone, that it could be a little thinner, because it all comes from one quarry in Lyons, Colorado. And if you go there right now to get some flagstone, you'll find that it's closed. It closes through the winter. On there. And so, you know, it puts people in a tough position, especially back then when we're saying you need to fix this within 30 days on there. Well, this isn't going to be open for 4 months on there. So you could probably use a more nuanced A in that FAQ.
Yeah, maybe move the FAQ closer to the ordinance language about it, if there's an intact piece versus if there isn't or whatever. But you're right. Back in 2018, we learned a lot. I remember there was a woman who led some demonstrations of there are various ways to re-level. And that was delightful. So that helped inform the compromise that's in the ordinance. Thank you. And we'll give Jill the last question.
Hey Nick, long time no see.
Hello, Jill. Good to see you.
I just wanted to circle back to a conversation we were having last summer Is Denver going to come up with a Denver specific sidewalk stamp so that we all know what sidewalks our taxpayer dollars are paying for and feel pride as we walk around the city?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, no, that is something just for the group. This is something we've been talking to. And then I think with all the different types of campaign things that were going on within the city in the fall, we were thought maybe why don't we hold off on this? We want to make sure it gets the attention it deserves. But I will, when we get our sidewalk lead here in here shortly, let's re-up that conversation, Jill, because I do think that's a great idea. Because it is something and this is not just me blowing sunshine. I mean, this is, like I said, we're on the vanguard. We are doing something very different than every other city on it. And again, I cannot thank you enough and the advocates that it's we've got funding to do this. And that's what makes this sustainable and exciting. But yeah, I think voters should be recognized for their forethought in this. And so, yeah, I'm more than happy to let's kickstart that conversation now that we're in the politically slower period.
What a great place to end. Thank you so much for joining us, Nicholas. I want to
My
recognize
pleasure.
our CDOT commissioner who stayed with us for most of the meeting. Thank you so much, and thank you all. We meet every other month, so we'll be meeting again in March. All the meeting dates have been set. You can find them at the bottom of every meeting announcements, the second Thursday of every alternating month, the odd numbered months. And we'll endeavor to bring you more dense meetings with timely topics. Thanks very much.